I have sent you.
Okay, sir. I'm checking.
Yeah.
Sir, I got it.
Yeah. It should be a paragraph.
Sir. Yes, yes.
Actually, last week when you asked me, I didn't have this with me. I prepared for something. So
Okay, sir. Actually, I mean, from your website, we
yeah, it is
drafted
not
something.
updated. That is the only thing there.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good morning. Able to hear me? There is a your mic has been muted, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Anil.
Sir.
Good morning, Dr. Sridevi, madam. Good morning. How are you? So today is the last day of this webinar. Yeah.
Yes, yes, sir.
We had a series of talks on this topic, sustainable materials and construction technologies. I think that is a good collection of webinars that we have. And I'm sure that many of the construction professionals also have been sending their feedback also. It was so useful for them.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, that's nice.
And today's topic also is very relevant in the age of pandemic. Indoor air quality, natural ventilation, energy efficient building materials. The only thing is that how it has to be, implemented.
Rajshekhar sir has worked.
Yes, madam.
He has done research in this area, sir. He has published several papers, and for this topic, he is the apt person.
So under 2 minutes, 69 participants have logged in.
Many are not comfortable with this logging in YouTube. and Facebook.
They're not comfortable, is it?
Yes, because our students, we are using MS Teams.
All right, all right.
So because of this bandwidth issues, they are not in a position to install this.
Okay. What about Cisco WebEx?
WebEx has slightly higher bandwidth compared to Zoom and Google Meet.
Okay.
We have our classes evaluations all online this semester.
Okay.
So, our official thing is WebEx because we, as an institute, we use WebEx for teaching, evaluation, and all that. But at times when we have this bandwidth issue, for a while we shift to the other platforms.
All right.
And especially when a lot of students,
too many videos, content being shared. So I think that has a little, but I think more or less everything is same. Maybe the look and feel is.
Shall we start now? I think it's 11.
Yes.
Or maybe another 2 minutes we'll give. Yeah, 73 participants are logged in. We'll give another 1 or 2 minutes so that some of them are in the process of logging in. So we'll start off. Good morning to all the construction professionals who have logged in, and good morning the speaker of the day, Dr. Rajshekhar, and good morning to you, Dr. Sridevi. So what we will do is that today, as all of us know, is a day when we would be talking about, when our speaker would be talking about energy efficient building materials. And I am sure that this would be relevant to all the professionals who have logged in, because over the last few days, that is this week, starting this week, we had a number of discussions on admixtures in concrete, and then we had genetic algorithm, non-destructive testing in concrete, and civil engineers and sustainable construction. So various topics which is related to sustainability, and there has also been a kind of concern whether concrete is sustainable or not. But the thing is that as of now, as all of us know, that concrete is the second most widely used material on this planet Earth. So what we can do is that we need to think about how to make concrete more sustainable. As of now, I do not know whether concrete can be replaced because of the volume, sheer volume that it has got. So concrete is being used in such wide quantities, and whatever materials is being used in concrete, say for example aggregates or cement, we need to see how we can make it more green. Like say for example addition of blending material, or usage of blended cement, Portland Pozzolana cement, Portland slag cement, or making concrete optimized. In the say for example doing a concrete mix design, which is not being done in many of the small construction projects, and we find that more quantity of cement than what is required ends up in the concrete itself, thereby leading to a lot of shrinkage cracks. So one aspect is that we need to look at the durability of concrete, the life of the concrete structure. That by itself shows that it is sustainable, it is durable. So I think concrete can be made more sustainable, and since that is a material which is being used in huge quantities, we can think over it. If you look at embodied energy, for that matter, embodied energy of concrete is much lesser than many other material which can be used. So I think we can apply our mind in making it more sustainable. And maybe the speakers that have come today is the 75th webinar that we are having, and we had a lot of topics on blended cements, blending materials, reinforcement detailing, repair and rehabilitation. So all this is in fact an endeavor to ensure that the concrete structures are not demolished, and we try to prolong the life, and we look at durability from a new perspective. That is the reason why Ramco Cements has endeavored in this field, and we have a lot of equipments to check the durability of concrete, like say for example RCPT test, water permeability test. And we find that there has been a sea change in many of the consultants who are asking for the durability test in concrete. as against the compressive strength alone. So heat of hydration is being asked nowadays. What is the heat of hydration of cement? What could be the heat of hydration of concrete? So I think that is a good development in this area, and we feel that a lot of further thoughts would go in this area, and a lot of inputs also would be given in ensuring that the concrete is durable and it has a longer life. So with those few words, let me just request Dr. Sridevi to introduce the speaker of the day, Dr. Rajshekhar, who has taken off his time to join us and to share his presentation with us. Over to you, Dr. Sridevi, for introducing the speaker, Dr. Rajshekhar. Hello, Sridevi madam. I think there is some bandwidth problem.
Yes, sir. It's showing.
Now she's coming. Yeah, she should be coming within a couple of minutes. Yes, madam. Yeah, we can start off with the introduction.
So good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the 5th day of our FDP program, Faculty Development on Sustainable Materials and Construction Technologies. Today we have with us Dr. E. Rajshekhar, Assistant Professor, present on efficient building materials. So for the benefit of audience, I would like to give brief introduction of E. Rajshekhar. Dr. Rajshekhar is Assistant Professor at IIT Roorkee in the Department of Architecture and Planning. He is an architect specialized in functional efficiency of built environments and building physics. He holds an MS by research and PhD degree, Building Technology and Construction Management Division, Department of Civil Engineering, IIT Madras. Prior to joining IIT Roorkee, he has worked at the Center of Excellence and Futuristic Developments, Buildings and Factories at L&T Construction as a research and development engineer for 5 years. Research is focused on methods and materials to achieve climate-sensitive, environmentally responsive, and digitally knit built environments. He is currently researching in the areas of thermal comfort and energy efficiency in built environments, and also building information modeling and energy and GIS applications for sustainable development. He has received over $1 million grant for his research in this field from various national and international agencies and industries. He has been awarded IUSSTF Bhavan Postdoctoral Fellowship and Shastri Indo-Canadian Doctoral Fellowship. He is a US Green Building Council Lead Accredited Professional, Griha India Certified Professional, and ESTI DAMA, UAE Pearl Rating System Accredited Professional. He is a NABET accredited functional area expert in noise and vibration. He has authored around 40 publications in leading international and peer-reviewed journals. And also he presented several papers at international forums and conferences. He has been associated with the green and energy efficiency rating of major projects include Administrative Building, Chennai Metro Rail, PNG factory at Bhopal, which is aspiring for LEED Silver, then Cognizant Technology Solutions at Pune, LEED, they got gold rate. TCS Gandhinagar, which is IGBC LEED gold rate, and L&T Technology Center 3. He has provided acoustical design and noise control solutions for various projects, including administrative building of Chennai Metro Rail, aircraft training facility, UP, a 1,000-seat auditorium at Sainik School, Odisha, 3 numbers of 1,500-seat auditorium for Super Speciality Medical Research Institute at Odisha, Cognizant Technologies, Pune and Chennai. He has contributed to the development of 7 multimedia educational materials as a part of US Indo International Research Education Industry and Community Project experiences for students funded by National Science Foundation USA. So with this brief introduction, I request Professor Rajshekhar to deliver his presentation. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Sridevi madam. Thank you, Mr. Anil, for organizing this event, and thank you for giving me an invitation. Just getting my screen. It's visible.
It is visible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So before we start, I quickly wanted to say a bit about the relevance of what we have been talking about
past 4
or so, and the kind of work or research that I have been associated with for the last.
or more. Primarily, I have been working on sustainability assessment of concrete. In the process, so initially when I started, we were looking at
Material replacements like fly ash associated concrete, recycled concrete. We were looking at that direction, thinking or searching for sustainability. But then at a point we started realizing that there is a small issue in the way the sustainability assessment itself is done. So then we started restructuring the way the sustainability assessment of emerging materials have to be done. So I'll be covering a bit of that in that sense. Today I'm not going to talk much about the material structural properties or their durability related issues. I'm not a person working on that, but mostly I will be talking about its energy and energy implications. So to get further on, this is what I will be talking about for about 60 minutes from now. We will look at what is this energy in buildings, what is taking away the energy, where the energy is being used, and what is the contribution of materials.
couple of case studies. I'm a person who works on field measurements. That is what I mostly do. I instrument buildings across India, so I will be mostly my work research is evolving around field measurements and real-time data and how the building is performing. So I'll be
I think there is a slight problem in audio, Dr. Rajshekhar. If you can just, be near the microphone or something.
okay.
Yeah, now it's okay. Because the voice was coming and then it goes down. That's why.
Should probably be some net issue. I'll see because my connection is okay.
Can
If there is
you
an issue, just ping me. I will be able.
Yeah. We'll
Thank you. So before we move, this is a slide which I kind of take up every time I start a new topic. This is how I see the building and I see the energy and the performance of a building. There are three major aspects which is driving the energy use in building. Number one, it is the environment. It is the thermal severity. Say I build something in Hyderabad versus I build something in Delhi, Roorkee, Chennai, Bangalore. So it is the thermal environment that is driving some of our primary energy needs in the building. It is the occupant. So it is me living in Bangalore, it is me living in Delhi, or me living in Roorkee,
Making the building use more or less energy. So first is the environment, which is putting some thermal stress on the building. Second, it is the occupant who is using these gadgets or appliances.
is eating the energy. And third, the building itself. When I say building itself, it is the brick and mortar or the envelope or the fenestration, you can call glazing, everything put together, what makes the building by itself, just by itself. But it doesn't end with these three things. There is something very interesting. If you look at the building starts interacting with the environment. So there is something called building environment.
Then the building the building starts interacting with the occupant starts interacting with the building. I open my window. I use my building in certain times of the day. I keep my buildings, I paint my building the way I want. So there is an interaction which, as a
treatment I am doing with a building. And the third interaction which happens is between the occupant. I'm getting used to an environment. I live.
I prefer certain type of environment. I do
For certain environment. So these collective
something called the dynamic performance of the whole building. Now, when we talk about sustainability, you
talking about sustainability of concrete. I'm broadly talking about energy efficiency or sustainability of building. So, okay.
Sorry to interrupt, sir. I think the headphone is not plugged properly. Is it possible to out and plug it back in? Other port as well, if there is an option.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible, sir, but all of a sudden the audio, this thing quality deteriorates because of the loose connection. That's the only possibility.
I'm not seeing anything that way. Is it fine now?
Yeah. Please go ahead,
Just
sir.
let me know if again if there is an issue, I will try to fix it.
Yeah, thank you.
No mention. I'm sorry for that. So I'll just quickly move on to energy in buildings. Commonly, we refer energy in the buildings to the cooling energy, that is the climate loading we call. What is the load which is imposed on the building by outdoor environment? It is a basic thing which HVAC engineers do in cooling load calculation. Plus, there is a internal loading. That is, a building may have 10 people, it may have 100 people, or maybe just one person. Maybe it has 100 computers, maybe it just has one piece of equipment. So this together gives you the cooling energy, which is of course a major energy guzzler in the buildings. Any building, it could be office, it could be a residential building today, a simple middle income group residence. Cooling energy demand is something which is a major share. Second comes the lighting energy. Apparently, in the last 3 to 4 years, the lighting energy demand has gradually come down for two reasons. Number one, we have started shifting towards more efficient lighting systems. And number two, the time of usage, duration of usage, plus there are some code standards which have come into picture, which have started driving natural lighting to be more utilized, better utilized. So probably these two reasons, somehow the lighting energy demand has slightly percolated down. Then there are plug loads, which is like any gadget that we use. In an office, it could be computers, photocopy machines. At home, it could be your oven, fridge, washing machine, etc. If you look at like you have your appliance rating, Bureau of Energy Efficiency also has come up with a schematic. I wouldn't say it is a perfected rating, but still it has come up with a now a ballpark rating for buildings also. Primarily for residential buildings, of course, there is also a rating, EPA rating for office buildings, commercial buildings, but I would primarily be talking about residential building. That is the context what I am going to cover more. If you look at, there is something called EPI, that is Energy Performance Index. That is nothing but how many units of electricity that you use per square meter in a year. Based on that, and depending on which location, which climate you are located in, the numbers or the band of numbers might fetch you a single star, 2 star, all the way to 5 star. And it also depends on whether your building is less than 50% air conditioned, like our residences, are more than 50% air conditioned. Now, before we move on to more into the materials of it, material side of it, let us just look at how this EPI benchmarks are made and what are the variations. I will come back to this point, like why I'm talking more about EPI and EPI benchmarks. This is a simple residential tower. It was a case study that we did in Chennai city, somewhere in the outskirts of Chennai. There are about 600 plus houses in this development. It is a small gated community. It's about 15 storied gated community. There are around 600 middle income and higher middle income. Typically 3 bedroom luxury units are present here. So we did a slightly systematic assessment of their set point temperatures. We studied their hours of usage, their appliances. It is like a pre-audit or pre-energy audit. It's not a complete energy audit. But then we started looking at systematically what is their electrical energy consumption. We did take about 5 years of data, like what they have been consuming in the past 5 years. Then the next step was we started looking at how this energy consumption is varying across these buildings. So what we were able to look at was there are 3 types of houses here, like a 3 bedroom, a slightly larger 3 bedroom, and a luxury, that is 3.5 or 4 roomed unit you can call. So intrinsically these units had some variation. This is a simple graph which is relating the temperature versus monthly energy consumption. Of course, you have the monthly temperature driving the energy consumption. So strongly there is, like when it is summer, there is more energy consumption. It is that simple. But if you actually look little more into the details of it, there is a different solar exposure for each of these buildings. What you are seeing is like a small block model. So each orientation has a different type of solar exposure all through the year. I'm not going into the details of it again. And because of this, if you see here, when I say NES, it means north, east, and south exposed. This is north, west, and south exposed. So if you actually see each of these house, this part is a house, this is another house. So if you see this, each house is exposed to 3 different orientations. Now, depending on the orientation, there is again a strong influence. Now I'll stop it here. I will come back to this in about 5 minutes. Let us look at what the total energy in building is. It is not just the operational energy, that is cooling, lighting, and appliance energy. It is not just the operational energy alone. We also have embodied energy, that is the energy which is already embedded into the material before you take possession of your building. It is an aggregated energy of what it takes to make a brick, what it takes to make a precast concrete wall, what it makes to cast in situ, shear wall system, what it makes to make an RCC column, everything, starting from your pavements to your handrail to everything, glass to everything. So if you meticulously total everything, you get the total embodied energy. And this embodied energy is already built in, for which the owner is not liable. It's already there, by virtue of your material specification and your construction technology. This energy is already built into your building system. This is what Mr. Anil was referring to about whether concrete is sustainable, whether it has low or high embodied energy, and how to reduce it. We will just go back to that point very specifically. Of course, there are different ways of assessing embodied energy. Again, I'm not going into the details of what these methods are. In a simple term, we mostly refer to a method called cradle to gate. Cradle is where the material is born, that is where you excavate and pick the raw materials. And grave is like where you bury it, like you dump it. Construction demolition waste is, if it is dumped, it becomes grave. But if you are trying to recycle it, putting it back into the cycle, then it becomes cradle to cradle. But in simpler calculations, we use cradle to gate. That is, it is born at some place and it is reaching me. I am purchasing the material, so it is delivered to my gate. So all that energy in transportation, in making, in excavating, stacking it up, storing, everything put together adds up to cradle to gate. So this is a common approach which you will find in any research or any documents that you go through. Life cycle assessment is very useful in the sense that it tries to capture the holistic picture of the material's actual energy consumption. Because if I am saying the material is very good insulator, actually what I mean is when I use that insulating material in my wall system or in my building envelope, I am reducing the operational energy. But maybe the making process of the material itself could have been very exhaustive and it would have eaten up a lot of energy there. So all insulating materials or energy efficient wall systems may not be of good or favorable embodied energy. Maybe already there is a lot of embodied energy built in. The common example, as I always take in any discussion debates, is the sustainability of a material by itself doesn't mean anything in today's market. You give the most sustainable material to a multi-storied building and the guy has 3 air conditioners and he runs it every day, then the concept of sustainability is totally gone. Whereas if you actually use a moderate material to an energy conscious user, you are delivering it, then the overall energy that the lifespan of the material and the building which is taking, that makes a lot of difference. So it is the material, it is the way in which the material is being put, the way in which the building is taken up, the way in which it is operated, everything counts, and life cycle assessment lets you do that. So starting from resource extraction, manufacture, taking it to the building, and usage in the building. Here is where the concept of service life comes. Instead of 40 years service life, if I am able to make it 45, 50 years, 60 years. Now, the same material, maybe it is not that low embodied energy, maybe it has slightly higher embodied energy. For example, there is a fly ash brick versus there is a normal brick. Maybe fly ash brick, for example, can have more or less equivalent or slightly lower embodied energy than brick. But if there is a building which has been made such that the service life is 15 years or 20 years more, then by default, the overall energy that the material is served in its lifespan cannot be compared because that material is living 20 years more. So durability and service life has a critical role in life cycle assessment. Then the next thing is, what do you do after your usage? For example, if you take any of our traditional buildings, we have been using brick, we have been using limestone, plaster, but most interesting thing is we do not dump those materials. All those bricks are retrieved and they are broken, used back as aggregates or as weatherproofing cores, or in some cases they are being reused as brick itself in the full form. So in that sense, the material which was used say 100 years ago is still living its life. Its life is not yet over. So if you look at the embodied energy or the total life cycle energy, it has stretched itself and it has become really efficient. Now, the most challenging part in emerging materials, for example, I may be using a EPS insulation, say an expanded polystyrene or an extruded polystyrene, XPS material. It has a service life of 40 years, 50 years. I can say that the material is sustainable, provided I am able to find out a way to recycle it, because most of our building stock, at least in India, have already crossed their half of their service life. That is the mass housing, a large number of industrial buildings plus a large number of commercial buildings have already lived a life of 20 to 25 years or more. So in that sense, we are going to face a lot of demolished buildings, or we are going to be left with a lot of construction demolition waste. In a span of around 10 to 15 years, we will start receiving those construction waste. So now is the time to think, number one, how to extend the service life. Number two is how to recycle those materials, how to put them back into use in our system. Now, there is something very interesting. I am talking about, say, for example, a brick or a brick and mortar or any masonry system, which is an infill material into a RC frame structure. Frame structure is most common in mid and low rise residential buildings in India. If you look at it, you simply have your concrete RCC, beams and columns, and you have some infill material. You can have brick, you can have fly ash brick, you can have aerated concrete, anything, but it is a brick and or masonry system with RC frame structure. Now, there is a simple difference. The way, this is what I was talking about when I started the presentation. There is a way in which the embodied energy is segregated in the material. What happens in the process of brick making? I'm not doing any design, I'm not doing any big research. I'm excavating clay, I'm preparing it, I'm kind of molding it, maybe drying it for a while, then burning it, either in factory or in a kiln. Then I'm stacking it, transporting it, it comes to the site. But interestingly, when it comes to concrete, potentially concrete or concrete structures are taking two major ways of application. Number one, we are using shear wall system, that is a cast in situ concrete, where you have your reinforcements in place and then the concrete is just pumped into the walls, so you get your shear wall system. Number two, another emerging method or already emerged method I should say, is a precast concrete system. So you make everything in the factory, you just get concrete slabs, and those concrete slabs, even staircases, sometimes smaller rooms like your bathroom units, are just brought in a truck and they are assembled. So typically you are assembling or fabricating in the site. Now, what we actually found in our study, we have been doing this research for about 3 to 4 years. We are working with construction industries like National, NBCC, Building Construction Company plus L&T. We have been taking data, we have been looking at their sites, we have been looking at their supply chain and their footprints. What we were able to understand was, it is not purely excavation, transport and installation in the site, but there is a research component, there is a design component, but more so, if you look at on the site, it takes, for example, 20 days to construct maybe like a small room made out of brick and mortar, which, assuming that I already have my RCC frames or rather columns and beams in place, it might take, for example, 20 days to keep the bricks in place, plaster it, then curing comes later. Whereas the cycle time we call, if you take the cycle time of cast in situ concrete, it is less than half of what you do in brick. Now, if I take the cycle time of precast concrete, the cycle time is further lesser. Now, who's counting the duration of construction and the labor associated? Again, labor, if you actually count how many people would have constructed a single story house made up of RC frame and brick plaster, how many days, how many people would have done this, versus if I have to construct a precast building of the same configuration, same plan configuration, how many people and how many days? The cycle time is almost 1/3, just 1/3 of what would actually be required for a brick and mortar building. I'm not talking about against the masonry material, or I'm not trying to talk about something negative or positive, but I'm trying to present the fact, citing that there are a few processes or some chains or links that have been missing when we count the embodied energy or the environmental friendliness of some of the emerging material. Because of this, there has been an impression that, okay, concrete, it has a lot of energy in making cement. It consumes a lot of energy to, excavate and grind the aggregates. Sand, or, the industry sand is not environmentally friendly. You have steel. Again, steel industry takes a lot of energy. But if you actually start counting, there is a recycling potential. There is already an industry waste like slag cement. There is a fly ash cement. You have a lot of substitutes going in there without even getting into recycled material aggregates or the alternate construction systems or materials which are getting into concrete. That is still in research state. I wouldn't even want to go into that direction. Just assume what is commercially available. There is an engineering component. So somebody or a team is sitting in an industry doing research. So there is some amount of energy consumed there. Then there is a development of that idea. Then design detailing happens. Then there is a fabrication part in the industry that is taking in a share of its energy. Then it is transported and it is assembled. So what we did actually was, we went into mapping the whole energy consumption links, I would say, are sub-processes of new construction system. Interestingly, we thought we should have, or rather we found, or we could establish that it is not a single directional or a single dimension approach. It should have three approaches. That is, one is the material quantity, number two is the manpower, and three is the time. It should be a three-dimensional assessment which will give the actual picture of the embodied energy or the carbon footprint or the carbon emission associated with these materials. When I say three dimension, why I am insisting here is most of our embodied energy assessment today is single dimension. If you ask an expert to compute what is the embodied energy, he or she is going to compute the material quantity. Either he will take the bill of quantity or he will compute what is the quantity estimation he will be doing, and based on that there is an embodied energy value. For example, if it is brick, it is X. If it is concrete, it is Y. And if it is a fly ash mixed concrete, if it is some other industry waste or slag based concrete, then there is a Z value. Now these are aggregated, but what we actually think or we have is established through our field data, there is an offsite process which cannot be ignored. For example, there is a design process, there is a fabrication process. When I say design, there is resource which is material and manpower, fuel as well as infrastructure. When there is a fabrication, there is a process, that is techniques and logistics, plus you have technology, then you have certain specific equipment which could be manufacturing equipment or some equipment which is used for lifting, placing, assembling. Then there is an on-site process. In the on-site process, again it is material, manpower, fuel plus techniques, logistics and equipment. Now if you look at this template and I am comparing brick versus cast in situ concrete versus a prefabricated concrete. What we found was prefabricated concrete interestingly emerged as having lesser embodied energy compared to a typical traditional brick and mortar or a masonry based RC frame construction. This comes out of a sample of around 10 different construction projects engineered in a similar way, more or less with similar plan form configuration in the same city. This data comes from Delhi and Mumbai. We found precast to be slightly lesser in embodied energy, or if you even negate some of the uncertainties, it is comparable, it is somewhere more efficient, I can rather say. This is what we could establish. Now to give you a picture of the actual numbers of embodied energy that we are talking about. There is, this is a typical building. I'm sorry for a slight juggle in the camera. When we look at the embodied energy share, this is a typical residential tower in Chennai. We did a thorough study of item by item, component by component calculation of embodied energy. Of course, I didn't use the template that I was showing you, but this is a simple embodied energy calculation. That means when I say this many tons of concrete, I am just computing cradle to gate how much it has taken to make the concrete. What I'm trying to show here is this was a raft foundation with around 14 story tall tower. The raft foundation takes almost 52% of the energy which is required. So now what is so interesting here is, irrespective of what material I'm going to use in my superstructure, what type of further materials I'm going to use for my paving, for my plastering, finishing, etc. When I'm going for a high-rise building, already the footing or what is under the ground, this building had two basements, two car parks, two basements were there. So if you actually look at below ground, you cannot negotiate with this because there is a live load, there is a dead load, and this much is the type of footing for the soil which is to be designed. It is to be done. So now almost half of the embodied energy is already taken because you are building something 15, 20 story, 25 story tall. So the interesting point here is the embodied energy or the carbon footprint, which is a derivative of embodied energy, is actually determined also by the type of structure that you are building and the scale of the structure that you are building. There is a starking difference between a single story building, a 3 to 4 story, that is a low rise building, maybe 8 to 10 story residential tower versus a 20 story or a 15 story residential tower or more. So the share of the structural embodied energy or the substructure embodied energy is very significant as the building starts getting taller and taller. So whatever you do, you bring in a lot of recycled material. I say that, I'm using this kind of a plaster, I'm using this type of low energy material. But unless you are able to innovate something on the foundation part of it, which can be of low carbon, or you totally shift to a low rise, wider development, again, there will be environmental impact problem there if you spread out your construction instead of high rise, because high rise is in a way solving a lot of ecological problems. It is just stacked up some point. If I have to spread 1,000 houses horizontally, it will eat away a lot of my landscape. Now, just quickly going back, these houses had, for example, a total embodied energy of almost 3.16 gigajoules per meter square. This per meter square of built up area. There are different type of houses here. These houses, depending on the floor area, had around 400 to around 550 gigajoules per house. Like say you are a building owner, you are just going to take the key from the contractor or the developer. When the time you are taking the key, you can think that you are actually taking the key for 500 gigajoules of embodied energy, which is already gone in. Now, just to quickly compare the contrast of a rural household, if you take a single storied, I'm not talking about a hut, I'm not talking about a thatched roof mud hut. It's not that. I'm talking about a simple single storied medieval residential building in a rural area. You may find the embodied energy to be around 0.6 to around 1.5 gigajoules per meter square, compared to a 2 to 3 times higher embodied energy that we are talking about in a typical multi-storied building. Now, here we move into a slightly another interesting concept called life cycle energy of the building. Life cycle energy in simple terms is a addition of embodied energy and operational energy. Now, I take possession of the house and I am going to use this house without a major renovation for around 30 to 35 years. Let us say 40 years of service life. In 40 years, every day I am running air conditioner. I am burning energy to have my lighting, to run my appliances, any gadget that I use, the plug loads. All these things, my meter basically. So if your meter is running continuously for 40 years, at the end of 40 years, I'm just taking your meter reading that in 40 years, how much energy you have consumed. And I'm adding up to that, the 400 gigajoules that you already had before even you took possession. Now, your total life cycle energy is going to be around 1400, or depending on the house, it may go up to around 23 or 2500 in some cases, gigajoules per home. Now, please note the material or the embodied energy which was built into that building was around 500 to around, let us say, 500. Now, after 40 years of service life, the total life cycle energy is around 2000, which is almost 4 times of what is your embodied energy, or let us say 3 times, the embodied minus the operational part. I had 500 plus another 1500 I have consumed during my operation. So the operational side of it, maybe when our cooling systems become more efficient, when our performance of the building becomes more efficient, when my load on the climate, due to the climate on the building, that is the efficiency of the material in terms of their thermal performance is improved, the design of the building is improved, all these can significantly contribute to the life cycle energy reduction of the building. I'll show you a little bit of data in this. This is the actual life cycle energy plot for one of the buildings that we studied, for one of the towers. If you look at this graph, this is the service life. I have taken 50 years of service life. The gray portion that you see in the bottom, that is the initial embodied energy, which is somewhere around 300, 350 into 10 power 6. So I am talking about in gigajoules here. This is megajoules, so you convert it. Sorry for that. You convert it, you will get in gigajoules, the previous slide we talked about. So this slide, this graph is in megajoules. Second, there is a small orange component that is recurring embodied energy. Any minor repair, any minor patching up, whitewashing, cleaning, that activities that you will do, that service and maintenance of the building, that is counted as recurring embodied energy. Then the blue one is a cooling operational energy. This is a cumulative graph. So every year, this is getting added up here. This is getting added up here. So this whole thing gets added up. Let me see the feedback. Is there some issue with the audio or something?
No, it's okay. We are able to hear you.
Okay, there
Yeah,
was
we
an
can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I pressed
The
the wrong
share
button.
screen has gone, no?
Yeah. I was trying to.
Okay, now it's coming.
I'm sorry for that.
No, it's okay. Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah, this is a cumulative graph. So what you actually see is a cumulative cooling operational energy. So if I'm cutting this at 25 years, the embodied to operational energy ratio is around 60% is embodied energy, 40% operational energy. Whereas if I'm able to extend the service life of this building, double it to 50 years, I'm going somewhere to 37% of embodied energy and 63% of operational energy. I am not meaning that embodied is not contributing. All I'm trying to say is merely by improving the durability or increasing the service life of this building, I'm actually able to reduce the burden that is imposed just because I'm using a certain material. This is a simpler intervention that can always happen due to good engineering. Number two, the second part that can actually reduces the utility and cooling operational energy. This we believe that every year, every decade, there is a drastic step in energy efficiency of equipment. We didn't have this inverter technology or the VRF systems 10 years back, 15 years back widely in the market. But now we do have very efficient systems and it keeps improving. Maybe 10 years down the line, we will get much better systems. So overall, the share of operational energy is going to be coming down. We are coming up with better materials which are thermally much better. So then I'm able to reduce that share. So that 60% or that total chunk of around 1500 to 2000 gigajoules that we saw is eventually going to come down. But looking at from the materials perspective, this is going to be on responsibility on our end. I'll show you a small case study that we did using a spatial tool, which here we actually combined a spatial like geospatial system plus building information modeling, and we tried to map the life cycle energy as of buildings. We took our own campus. This is IIT Roorkee campus. We took a part of the campus just to make sure we have variety of buildings coming in. We took around 40 acres where we had apartments, we had institutional buildings, a hospital block, we had hostels and some departments. So guest house. So we took a stretch which is around about 40 acres in area and variety of buildings because of their spatial type material used and their operational character. These are the buildings for your view. We made a building information model. Some buildings are very old. That is, when I'm saying very old, there are some buildings in the same premise which is around 45 to 50-year old. There are buildings which are like 2 to 3 years old, some new academic blocks, a new hostel building which has come through. There are some medieval buildings which are like 10 to 12 years old. So first we did a building information model where we took the material quantities, we took the estimates. Then by default procedure, we computed the embodied energy of this material, this building. Then we took their monthly energy bills like we did in the previous case. So we took around 3 years of past 3 years of data. One small interesting stuff I can point out here. If you had seen the Chennai case, the monthly mean temperature versus monthly energy consumption. As the temperature increases, the energy consumption would have increased. But this is Roorkee. We have both the ends. We have very low or rather low temperatures as well as high temperature. So there is a moderate season where the energy consumption is pretty low. This part is summer. The right side is summer. The left side is winter. So you get actually a U-shaped profile. So somewhere around October or November, we start switching on our room heaters, and somewhere around March end, April, we start switching off our room coolers and air conditioners. So in summers, we have the cooling equipment taking the energy. Winter, we have heating equipment taking the energy. What I wish to point out here, the same building, same plan form, same spatial configuration, same material. If I am building in Chennai or Hyderabad versus if I am making the same building in a midland area like Delhi or Roorkee, the energy consumption, especially the operational energy consumption, is going to be much higher. So the overall sustainability dimension is also location dependent. Now quickly moving on, like I explained earlier, we did compute the embodied energy, we took the operational energy, then we computed a 50-year lifespan, life cycle energy of buildings, and we converted the tons of CO2 equivalent carbon dioxide, that is CO2 carbon footprint equivalent. Equivalent is we can add up the small other components by other gases, it's taken as equivalent of CO2. So here we are expressing as carbon footprint. So it is tons of CO2 equivalent. So starting from apartments to healthcare buildings, the CO2 emissions, for example, there is a guest house which is consuming pretty less because some of the rooms are air conditioned, some are not, or predominantly it is not air conditioned, versus we have some academic blocks plus a hostel building plus some of them which are consuming a pretty high amount of energy. There is embodied and operational share. I will go into the details. But actually what we started looking at is what has been the development of this building, because the campus didn't come through in a single day. Ours is a campus which was started in the British era. It has lived for around 180, close to 180 years now. It started as a small, one single building in that 340 acres versus we have almost occupied the whole 340 acres now in 2020. So what we did was we went around 40 to 50 years back. That means we started removing building by building, and then we started checking how much was the carbon emission 10 years back, how much was the carbon emission 20 years back, how much was it 50 years back. Plus we did a small but very interesting thing here. If you see the topmost layer of this slices that I have placed, I would, it reads carbon sequestration of landscape elements. This was a very meticulous exercise that my student did. He went around this 40 acres of land. He counted tree by tree. He noted the species. He counted the life of the tree. He calculated what is the age of the tree. Then depending on the age and the species, we can actually compute how much carbon it can sequestrate. That is, how much carbon it can eat during a particular time. We call it carbon sequestration potential. For example, some of our native species have better carbon sequestration potential. Classic example is banyan tree, neem tree. These have better carbon sequestration potential versus some of these smaller, quick, fast growing trees that we plant today. These trees do not eat that much of carbon. So now what we did was we went back with the help of our estate and works, that is our civil infrastructure management department. It's our maintenance and facility team basically in IIT Roorkee. With their help, we could retrieve some of the older maps where we could locate what was the vegetation, which areas were already built, when the buildings got added up, and their bill of quantities, their further construction related information. Then we recreated layer by layer and timeline by timeline, we created what was the carbon emission and carbon sequestration around like 40 years back versus what do we have right now. We could actually find our campus was carbon neutral. That is, it was actually eating the amount of carbon which we are generating around 25 to 30 years back. Plus, it was actually carbon positive. That is, it was taking more or sequestrating more carbon than it was emitting around 30 years back or close to 40 years back. As more and more buildings started using air conditioners, it is not primarily the materials contribution here we are talking about. It is the utility, because we had started putting in new equipment, new labs started coming in, more built up areas started to come in. Of course, that is naturally a reason, because we did count the embodied energy, which was somewhere from 70 to close to 500 tons within this 40 acres of land. This was a very interesting piece of study. And what we feel is this type of approaches give you a real holistic picture of what is the total, rather, what is the net embodied energy or what is the net footprint of a development. Instead of this, if I'm going to talk about, say, 1 ton of concrete, whether it is sustainable or not, maybe 1 cubic meter of concrete, whether it is sustainable or not, 1 square meter of a shear wall system, or like a 2 by 2 panel of precast wall, whether it is sustainable or not. It is not the whole answer. It is like, taking a small 5-minute analytical test for a student and judging that he is worth or unworthy. Whereas if you actually look at how he has performed, how he is going to perform, what is the strength, what are the dimensions associated, it is a multi-talented kind of assessment. That is what actually we are trying to look for. In that sense, we are able to get realistic picture. If you look more closely, this Building Material Technology Promotion Council has come up with around 11 emerging construction systems, of which precast, cast in situ are a couple of them. Plus, there are more which are not mentioned in that list. It is not a very comprehensive list though, but it does cover a lot of emerging materials and construction technologies which are in the market. Now, if you put them into these templates, we are able to get very interesting picture of the actual performance. Last but not least, I will just go into this for about 5 minutes. This is again becoming very essential because we are missing out some critical links in the way we look at the performance criteria for our building envelope. If you look at some of our older settlements, older houses, these buildings had nice roof forms, massive walls, thick, maybe 2 foot or 3 foot thick wall systems, and they have been very comfortable, convenient without air conditioning system. Of course, with today's demand supply gap, we cannot go back to building such maybe luxurious villas for our own selves. We again, it is compulsion of the day. It is a technology, it is the time, it is the demand which is forcing us into innovation and new. But how do we get back to the comfort of, or the comfort in which we were living? Maybe not the same building material, but a new material with similar type of performance. Now, most commonly used indicator for materials performance is the U value, that is thermal transmittance, which indicates how much amount of heat is conducted through a wall or a material when there is a unit temperature difference per square meter. So it is the amount of heat transferred from one direction to the other direction, one side to the other side, through conduction. But actually we are missing out on some of our existing or typically being used performance criteria. U value, for example, is an indicator of resistive insulation. There are actually 3 types of insulation which most of the working professionals miss out. Maybe they know it, but somehow they are not bringing it into the mainstream. That is actually a sorry figure here. We are mainly talking about resistive insulation. resistive insulation is so significant in very cold or extremely hot or extremely cold region, especially in extremely cold region. And this is the single most dominantly used indicator in most of the European countries and the US. They will be talking about something called R value, that is resistance value. We are talking about conductance and transmittance value, which is the conductive heat gain. So we are talking about how much the material can resist the heat. It's a resistive insulation. So the lower the U value, the higher the resistive potential. But actually we are missing out on two more very interesting things, that is the reflective insulation, which we typically were doing. If you go to Jaipur, if you go to Jodhpur, you would see their roofs are painted reflective just to protect themselves from sun or the heat. So the material by itself is not highly resistive, but it is reflective, so they are saved. Then you have another concept of capacitive insulation, that is how much it can store. Again, going back to our desert, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, Jaipur, if you see, the materials will be massive. The examples I showed you, the 2 foot, 3 foot thick walls, they are massive. They can store the heat all through the day and they can reject it back to the atmosphere all through the night. So this gives you three types of insulation, but mostly we have been hooked up to the U values. If you go to any new material that is available in the market, they will be talking about a better resistive performance. I am citing this for a simple reason, because concrete can be made as a very good capacitive insulator. Concrete has good density, it has nice specific heat capacity, but unfortunately, a 130 or 150 RC shear wall or precast is sufficient enough to take care of the structural loading for around 15 to 18 story or 20 storied structure. So, given that slim or slender envelope proportion, it is not becoming a capacitive insulation. But if I take a 200 or 300 concrete block, it is a very good thermal mass material or a capacitive material. It can store. What I'm trying to mean here is, if we can look at that direction, how to kind of incorporate the capacitive property of concrete into our design. Maybe at some place we are able to use it as a capacitive material. Without doing anything, concrete can become a very good insulator. I'm skipping some of them. I'm just jumping into the later part of it. Yeah. With our own experience, with some of the consulting as well as this industry support that we have been extending, we have been successful in creating a 150 structurally insulated precast concrete system. This concrete system has like 10 to 12 insulation, which is sandwiched between the two layers of reinforcement which is present. Now this is actually giving you a nearly equivalent performance of a brick wall, that is, it is meeting the U value, plus more than that, it is also meeting the thermal capacity requirement, that is, we express in terms of thermal time constant. It is more or less equaling the thermal time constant which is prescribed in our building codes, at least the National Building Code. National Building Code has, apart from U value, thermal time constant, thermal damping, thermal performance index. These are some of the criteria which are set forth in our National Building Code. So with 140, 150 concrete slab, and we have, I'm glad to share that we have gone in for fire rating, fire testing for this, 3.5 hours of fire rating has been tested for this material. Durability has been tested, spalling potential has been tested, constructability has been tested. We have done it in full scale. There are a couple of buildings, residential towers in Delhi, where we have employed this specific technology, and it is standing its time, like for now about 5-6 years it has been performed. So with this I would like to stop. Maybe I can take some questions. I wouldn't want to go much into the lecturing mode. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, questions are there. It was a nice presentation, Dr. Rajshekhar. In fact, you have touched upon the holistic aspect of how we need to go into evaluating material. It is not only the embodied energy, but operational energy, life cycle of building. Very interesting. A few of the questions by Dr. G. Venkateshwarlu. What is the design criteria of green building in different climatic conditions in various seismic zones when we compare Hyderabad and Delhi?
To be honest, I am not aware of the seismic codes because I have never worked on the seismic aspect of the building. But I can just tell you about the energy performance requirements, which are different. Unfortunately, I have to agree, both Hyderabad and Delhi fall under the same climate zone. Again, that is another revision that we are working currently along with the US partner, that is, and CBRI. It is a project we are almost ready to launch a revision for our climate data handbook, in which we are recategorizing the climate zones. But if you go with the current climate zone, both are defined as composite climate zone. So the energy performance requirement or the EPI requirement are similar, which is actually not correct. Hyderabad is not as severe as Delhi in summers and winters, especially in winters. It's mild winter and slightly milder summer, I would say, compared to Delhi. You don't get that much of heat wave phenomena. But if I have to choose U value of a material, I would have to be complying the same. I have to be using the same material. But what happens? Both the materials over 40 years, the building's energy would have been totally different in Hyderabad versus Delhi. That is the interesting picture of it. I'm not aware of the seismic part.
Seismic.
There might be differences.
Another question is, what is the role of Council of Architecture New Delhi in green building rating?
Practically, it is not an agency connected with green building rating. You see, green building is a voluntary process. There are a couple of agencies you can choose between. You have India, you have US, you have Griha. So there are agencies, they are just guiding you to score points and make you happy that, I have scored this much, which is like encouraging people, but COA doesn't have any role in it. It's just authorizing me as a designer that it's just checking my certificates to allow me to practice. That's it. Plus, now they are hand holding some institutes for architecture, curriculum development, and running the courses. Their responsibility lies there.
Okay. Dr. S.P. Achuri wants to know, he says, it's a nice presentation. Being this FDP, can you suggest faculty about how they can take this subject with students? As ECBC is mandatory in few states now, we need integrated design approach for the built environment. How about practice at IIT Roorkee?
Is it practice about teaching it or using it?
He's saying, can you suggest faculty about how they can take this subject with students? That is one aspect.
Okay.
And another thing is that how do we integrate both the practice and teaching? How do we integrate design approach with the built environment? So as you rightly said, both the aspect he wants.
See, first I would talk about using it or adapting it in practice. Again, I'm not going to comment much on ECBC because again it is a template which is built. So if ECBC says both Hyderabad, Delhi plus Lucknow, Jaipur, everything is composite climate, you are supposed to go with what is to be done for a composite climate. Of course, there are two different approaches. There is a standard compliance approach plus there is a case to case, that is optimization approach or a trade-off method. There are 2-3 methods which are there in ECBC. So implementation can be localized or you can just go with the application saying, okay, it is composite, I follow this particular table and I am complying there. So this is one part of it. Teaching learning, if it is a generic teaching learning, then see, we have certain courses now with NPTEL. I can suggest that there are a couple of interesting courses which are dealing with energy efficiency and building science. So at least fundamentals you will be able to get there. But at IIT, what we do is with architecture, we have couple of integrated courses where we have the energy and energy performance start in a course. There is a design of building start in a course, and they are supposed to apply this in the course, theory in the design studio. So the design studio evaluation sometimes is considering the application part of it. So that is how typically we do it. And I know there are other leading institutes which are adapting this practice. For civil, specifically, as far as civil engineering is concerned, I think it will be a good idea to go into the industry with basic understanding of the fundamentals rather than saying that I know what is in ECBC. My principle of understanding the subject means you understand the basics of what is insulation, what are the types of insulation. I'm just giving an example rather than saying I know the 2016 version of so and so code, because by the time you graduate in 2020, 4 years later the code would have been revised. So you just merely keep reading and keep updating yourself with the new and new version of code. Rather you start questioning why those numbers, how those numbers have come. Then I think that is a better way. At least from my end, this is what I do with my students. I do not basically teach them a specific standard like ECBC or LEED or any rating system for that matter, but I teach them how they are made.
I think that's a very logical way of looking at that. Another question is that any change in FAR and FSI for green building as per NBC?
I don't think so, because I know there is a speeding up of the approval processes that is existing, at least in many cities.
Okay.
You can skip the queue if you have certain minimum rating you are trying for, at least in the approval level. You have to submit that I'm going through this process. You have advantage, but I have not come across any FAR or FSI offsets that you
Okay.
can.
Because NBC 2016 they had brought out recently only, and there was a presentation also by BAS people,
Yes,
BAS
yes.
personnel. Recently we had a webinar on that, and they were in nothing much of it. Another question is, do we have any certificate courses related to green building construction? By Vignesh Bhartiya.
Green building certification, you can always get any accreditation. You can get accredited with IGBC, USGBC. See, this basically will tell you how to fill their forms, how to comply with their requirements. I'm not just saying it is a simple exam. It requires understanding of the fundamentals and the procedures, basically procedures. How do you do your practice to comply and score? How do you interpret it? What are the connected rules? But there is nothing which is going to specifically teach you on the construction practice like hand holding. But interestingly, what has happened is US Green Building Council, that is GBCI, now has a two-step rating process, accreditation process. Earlier, they used to give a single accredited professional certificate. You just have to clear one exam. But now you have an entry-level exam. Then they ask you to go back and work on one or two projects, get that experience certificate registered, then come back, write the second level of exam. Only then you are certified as a full professional. Otherwise, you are like an associate or something. They have a term for it. See, this industry of civil architecture, you learn by practice.
True.
No exam can teach you how to do it better.
And there is that how AAC blocks are creating that thermal comfort in buildings in India.
I can maybe give you a small insight of what I really found out from my measurements rather than see, typically these blocks or these materials are good and they are sold with a stamp of their U values. If you go to a person, a person who is making it, any lightweight material or low density material, there are two USPs for that. One is the low density, so handling is easy. You can lift it, you can carry it. The same crane can carry more material than brick. So these are advantages. Second is the thermal efficiency in terms of U value. Now, here is the small catch. If I'm using this material for an office building where the office is operating from 9 in the morning to 6 or 7 in the night, I need a very high thermal insulation or thermal resistance. So these AAC blocks or any type of insulated system, lightweight insulated system, is going to perform fairly by resisting as much as possible. So after 7 o'clock, AC is off, everybody is out of the building. But one interesting contradiction that we found is when people start using it in their air conditioned rooms, in their residences. Because we find most of residential buildings now, with people working in offices getting back home at 8 o'clock, every one of you might be doing. You rush to your home is so hot, and you try to run your AC as low as possible, and the compressor doesn't turn on. You have a voltage problem. Now, the issue here is the same material which has been resisting the heat all through the day from coming out, from coming in, out to in, is also resisting the heat from going out. It is trapping the heat. The problem is more prevalent in dense urban areas because the ventilation is barely minimum. If I'm talking about an outskirts where it is well ventilated, I open my window, 15 minutes, all the heat is gone out.
True.
But if I'm talking about a dense, city locality,
Yeah.
if I open my window, I see my neighbor's house. The wind can't come in. So it is just
No
the
cross ventilation. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, what we found, these 150 mm RC walls, they had a very good ambience during the night. And the load on air conditioner was actually lesser. This is a proven thing. We metered the house, two similar houses, or rather three similar houses, one made out of brick, one made out of a 150 mm shear wall concrete construction, the third out of AAC block. And this study was conducted in Hyderabad only. The RC building had lower energy compared to the other operational energy I'm talking about. So there is no, direct thing about which material is efficient. It depends on where you use it, how the other mechanisms of heat gain and losses work.
True. I think that's a very good insight. You had answered almost all the questions, and a very good interaction as well as a very good presentation. I am sure that this presentation number of takeaways would be there. And in fact, we had a series of talks, as I was telling, starting from advances in admixture in concrete to structure of hydrated cement paste to role of civil engineers in buildings. And then we had NDT testing and application of genetic algorithm for optimization. And now today we have energy efficient building material. So a very nice approach that you have made. We need to discover ourselves by, as you rightly said, many of the experiments, metering with different materials, and then doing some kind of real-time studies. I'm sure, and more than codal provision, it is answering why it is there. That is very important. So I would also request.
I want to add a small thing here.
Yes, please.
Is, currently we have a DST supported project which we are working with BVRIT and IIT Delhi.
Okay.
There are actually two model houses which are being constructed in BVRIT campus.
All right.
They are the same design.
Okay.
Everything up to the plinth level is same. But
Okay.
we are totally shifting the second house as a totally self-sustainable or self-sufficient in terms of energy.
Okay. Okay.
We are doing every possible thing, and that building is so modular. It's going to be so modular. You can dismantle, replace a wall panel. You can adjust the size of the window. Everything, and both are metered. So currently
right.
we are studying the first building. The second is almost come up to the lintel level. We have another year and a half to go in the project. We are somewhere in the midway. So I think we will have a good, interesting case to showcase.
Okay.
What we are
That's
doing.
really interesting. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajshekhar. And over to Dr. Sridevi for the other proceedings, like vote of thanks. Dr. Sridevi, madam.
Yes. Thank you very much. Sir, I wholeheartedly thank Dr. Rajshekhar for his presentation. We had so many interactions with Dr. Rajshekhar earlier in our campus. But today, I'm very happy that many students as well as faculties got benefited with his experience in working with energy efficient building materials. Sir, I thank you very much. And I also thank all the participants for participating in this webinar series and making it a success. And I Siemens, especially Mr. Suraj, Mr. Vignesh, and on top of it, Dr. Mr. Making this uninterrupted for 5 days. I thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you BVR IT for making this possible and collaborating with us. Let's meet tomorrow at 11 a.m. for optimization technique using RSM for proportioning of FRC by Dr. Muruga Bhupati from Rajapalayam. So he's at PAC Ramasamy Raja Polytechnic College. So he would be addressing tomorrow on this topic. Thank you, Dr. Rajsekhar, and thank you, Dr. Sridevi Madam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.